My name's Grant. Welcome to the next video on the healing series in learning to energy heal. So last time I talked about intention, and I didn't go into much detail about intention, explaining it quantum mechanically or via the law of attraction, but intention is important. So you get out what you put in, so remember to intend to be curious and to learn as much as you can from each of these lessons. So today we're actually going to do a technique. I'm going to have my wife here later on so that we can learn to feel the aura. So let's briefly explain what the aura is for those who might not know. It's basically an energy field that surrounds the physical body. It's also within the physical body as well. And there's lots of different models that people use with the aura. Lots and lots of different models, not just one. And it's very human nature, it seems these days, to always make things, put things into lots of little boxes and divide things up and cut things up and label things as different things. So you will find that a lot of models, especially more modern ones, are very detailed and they describe different layers, different densities, different chakras, different energy circuits that energy moves along. So it can get quite complex. But the aura isn't really layered like an onion, like a lot of these models. They're just ways of helping you understand the different vibrations that you might feel. So while the more detailed models can be very helpful to help other people understand things or yourself to understand things, it doesn't need to be that complex. And in reality, the aura is just a continuous field that emanates from you and ultimately is continuous with the energy fields of everyone and everything else as well. So it's not just layers of an onion that stop. So we're going to work from that more basic viewpoint today and learn to feel the aura. And how are we going to feel it? Because there are different senses, aren't there? We're going to use the sense of touch. So with my hand, I can touch physical objects, I can touch water, I can touch air, and we're going to extend that sense of touch into the energetic field so that you can learn to use your sense of touch to feel energy directly. So it's one of those things that if you're not used to doing, then it may seem a bit difficult at first, but with more and more practice it does become easier. One of the most important things is to really relax your hand. So the more relaxed your hand is, the less tension you have in your hand, the easier it is to pick up on the lighter things, on the lighter energies. So I will get stuck into it. Yes, I'll see you in the next part. Okay, so welcome to my healing room. We can talk a little bit more about how to set up a healing room and environment to receive people another time. But for the time being, just use common sense. Make sure they're comfortable. So having lots of blankets is useful because people do tend to get a bit cold when they're being treated. Sometimes hot, depends on what happens. Lots of pillows, of course. Some people like thick pillows, some people like thin. So be aware that different people like different things. And of course, just make sure they're warm. But like I say, we can go into more detail another time about that. So like I said at the start, what we're going to do today is use our sense of touch to start to get an awareness of the aura. We can go into more detail in the next section about what we sense might mean, but for the time being, let's just be curious and use our sense of touch to see what we can feel or not feel in the aura. Okay, so the first thing is we've got to have a nice relaxed hand. because that's the main thing we're going to be using to touch things. I've been to the gym this morning and I've been doing lots of climbing training recently, so my forearms are quite achy, they're quite tense, but regardless of that, I'm relaxing into the tension, letting that tension be there and just relaxing so that I can better receive information through my sense of touch. If I'm tense and fighting something, much harder to relax into the lighter energies and sense them. So what we're going to be doing is just moving our hand through the aura. The aura does extend way beyond the body, but people do find it easier to sense energies closer to the body. So we're just going to be moving our hand through the aura, left and right sides, from the bottom to top, and just seeing what you can feel. For some people, it's easier to feel a change in temperature in their hand. Maybe it goes cold in certain areas, maybe hot in others. For some people, when the hand passes over a certain area, the hand itself gets more tense, and then it relaxes in other areas. So that sense of tension can give you an idea of the energy you're feeling. Sometimes it's easier to feel when you pass through a certain area that it's harder to move your hand through that area, almost like it's thicker. So this area could feel a bit more like water, and maybe this area feels more like custard. So it's a bit harder to move your hand through. You may also get a sense of energy moving through your hands, and maybe in certain areas you get more of a sense of energy just flowing through your hand into the aura. So there's all sorts of different things that you can pick up via your hand and your sense of touch. To start with, contrast is very useful, and what I mean by that is, say if I am looking at this part of the aura over her right leg here, and I just try and feel things here, it may not be obvious what I'm feeling, it may not be obvious that it's thicker or thinner, the energy, or as we tend to say, denser or lighter, if I'm just sticking here. But if I compare what I feel here to maybe up here, that contrast between here and here can make it more obvious whether this energy feels lighter or heavier compared to another area. So it's much easier to sense things if you use a comparison of different areas of the aura, if that makes sense. So, I know my wife has been to the gym recently. She came with me this morning, so I know she worked her legs quite hard. So as I'm moving along her thigh here, I can tell at the top of the thigh here, my hand is getting tighter, it's getting heavier, it feels more tense, and my hand feels a little bit harder to move through this area as well. I'm quite experienced at allowing or not allowing energy to flow through my body, so I'm sure with some people they might feel that automatically energy starts to flow into this area. So I'm right-handed, so for a lot of people it's easier to feel with their more dominant hand, but play around with the other hand. You might find it easier with the opposite hand. Play around with it. And it's good to practice with the other hand because we will be using both hands for a lot of different techniques in the future. Typically speaking, the more dominant hand is better at giving energy, and the less dominant hand tends to be better at receiving, but that's not necessarily the case. Okay, we'll do a little bit of an explanation of what it might mean, what you sense in the next part of the video, and I will see you there. We're only going to go into what it might mean briefly here because there's a lot of scope to cover when you sense into things and what it might mean. And of course, a big thing to be aware of is perception and interpretation, because we all perceive differently. So what it might seem to mean for you could actually mean something different for the person you are treating. And that gets into the whole range of subjects where there can be more than one truth, and what's true for you may not be true for the person you're working on. So there's a lot of different things to talk about with what you might pick up in someone's aura might mean. And whether to talk about it or not, because sometimes when you say something about what you sense in an aura, they may take that to heart and make that part of their story and keep repeating it and make it more of a problem. So that's always something you need to be aware of when you're healing, is what to say, how to phrase it, how are they going to respond to that? Is it useful or not? Very briefly, the physical body and the aura are reciprocally related. So in other words, the physical body affects the aura and vice versa. And with all the other different models out there about the aura, so there's lots and lots of different models that divide the aura up into different layers and different energy circuits and chakras, and they can be quite different to each other, quite similar, some of them. And yes, it can get quite complex using those models, but even in those models, each layer or density or each energy body is reciprocally related to the others. They all affect each other. So, for example, my wife has been to the gym, so she's done a physical world thing. She's worked her legs quite hard, so her physical legs have been challenged beyond what they're used to being able to do, and so they're a bit tense. And so when there's a bit of tension and a lack of blood flow, therefore, through the muscle, that can create a lower vibration in that area, and then that affects the lower densities of the aura. So that's an example of how a physical world thing can affect the energetic. An injury is another good example. If you've had an operation or an accident and you've had a cut, then that can also be seen as a cut in the aura as well. And it can work the other way around. You can very often pick up on disturbances in the aura before it affects the physical body. The physical body is in this slow changing world we call the third density reality that we are currently experiencing. Many of us fourth density. And you can quite often pick up on a dense energy in part of the aura before it affects the physical body. If it's left there, if the person doesn't change their habits, their lifestyle, their way of thinking, their beliefs, the way they respond to things, and their, all these different things that can affect the aura, and that is allowed to develop, then eventually that would be there long enough and strong enough to start affecting the physical body and create a dis-ease in the physical body. Okay? So understanding that there's a reciprocal relationship can help you understand that if you pick up something in the aura, it doesn't necessarily mean there's something wrong with them physically. You may well pick up on, I can feel something over the gallbladder, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they have a gallbladder problem. Not yet anyway. And it may be the case that even if you pick up something over the gallbladder, that they will never have a gallbladder problem. It's just that it just happens to be a bit tense and uncomfortable in that area of the aura at that time. And later on it may dissipate. Which brings me on to the next point. The aura is constantly changing according to how someone thinks, how they feel, how they act, what they eat. So it's constantly changing. Some things will hang around in the aura for longer because they keep thinking about a certain something or doing something that manifests something in the aura for longer. But the aura does change. It's in constant flux. So when you are feeling across the aura and you feel something, say, here the first time, and then later on, maybe a few seconds, minutes or days later, and you come here and it feels different. It doesn't feel like it's so heavy there, maybe. That's a good example of the aura being in flux according to what the person you're working on is choosing. Okay, so bear those points in mind. So with the thigh, that was a very good example. It feels quite heavy in the top part of the thigh. My wife here, because I know she worked those muscles pretty hard today, so that's a good example of the physical affecting the energetic. And yeah, chatting with your client, with anything that they've done, can help you understand why something may be feeling uncomfortable in a certain part of the aura. So conversation can be very, very useful for helping you to understand what you're feeling. So when you are picking someone to practice with, it's always good to pick people who are interested in it too, of course, because they may pick up on what might be changing as you are feeling their aura, what they feel, whether they also feel tense in that area, or if they weren't that aware of it, questioning, oh, you feel tense over this area, I wonder what that could be, and they go, oh yeah, okay, I went to the gym before. So questioning can be useful, conversation can be useful to help you get an appreciation of what an energy might mean. Okay, so that's very, very briefly some explanations for what you might be feeling. We will go into a lot more detail in future videos about that. I just want to cover practice for the moment because this is the first technique video, so if you are passing your hand through someone's aura or your own, which is the next point I'll get on to in a minute, and you're not sure whether you feel much, just again focus on relaxing the hand and just try again. Use that contrast. If you're not sure if you're feeling much contrast with the body, you can also go away from the body to where it feels even lighter, because generally speaking it gets lighter and lighter the further away you are from the body. So maybe compare this energy up here in the aura compared to the body here. That might help you. Okay? So, picking someone who's interested is useful, like I was saying. If you don't have a person to work on, to practice, you can work on yourself. So I used to find that legs and arms were quite useful, so I would put my arm out in front and I would just move my hand across the aura for my arm and see what I could feel. Compare the hand to the wrist, to the forearm, to the elbow, and use that as a comparison, or on my thigh. So that's one thing you can do if you don't have someone to practice on straight away. The other idea is any pets or animals you may have around you. So you can use, dogs and cats, they love it. Cats can sometimes be a bit, what are you doing at first? But when they realise what you're doing, they can just lie back and relax. And of course, cats will get up when they've had enough. So they're very useful for letting you know whether they feel that they're done or not. So very useful. Horses, also very useful if you have access to horses. They are super sensitive, like all animals. And because a horse is quite a big animal, it can be more useful for feeling one area compared to another because everything is enlarged. And with horses, you will quite often find that if you move a hand through an area that feels uncomfortable for them, you will actually notice their skin flicker with tension. So they can be very useful for helping you highlight a particular area. Okay.